you want to find some way to really convey that great American novel of yours, or that poem that you just need to express your feelings with, or maybe you just want to get into the best college you can and you're working on that personal statement and you're struggling a little bit and you're thinking to yourself, how do I get better at this? Well, today I'm going to tell you. And it boils down to 3 easy steps that anybody can do. You ready? Here goes. Step 1, read more. Step 2, think more. Step 2, 3, write more. All right, let's break it down. Step 1 is to read more. Why is reading important? Reading is important because reading is the basis of all knowledge. Think about it. Think about it. Let it sink in. Reading is the basis of all knowledge. Let me say that one more time. Reading is the basis of all knowledge. Or to phrase it some other way, language is the basis of all knowledge. If you don't believe me, think about what you would know without language. Got him, right? You wouldn't know much. Okay, but in all seriousness, why is reading important? Reading is important because at the end of the day, all we are derivative organisms that sense the world around us. We have 5 inputs. We have our sight, sound, taste, touch, and hearing. And from that, this thing up here, this sapient brain of yours, creates meaning. It creates meaning by detecting patterns and organizing things into categories based off of those patterns and relating those patterns to you in a way that becomes instinctual, in a way that you learn the patterns, in a way that you recognize them and are able to better adapt and take advantage of them. It's basically how our intelligence works. Reading is a direct way for us to communicate with others complex ideas about those patterns. Everything is built upon those patterns. Everything is symbolic in one way or another. The more you read, the more you can identify complex patterns, the more you can derive patterns from those recognized patterns, the more you can combine those patterns in unique and novel ways to create new ideas, new narratives, new stories that rhyme with the old ones, because there really isn't a lot of original thought in this world. We're all just recognizing patterns. So the more you read, the more that you input into your brain, the more patterns that you're able to recognize, the more developed your taste is going to be, the better your writing is going to be overall, because your reference points are going to be stronger. It's as simple as that. If you want to be good at something, make sure you know what's out there and make sure that you can analyze or think about those things. Point number 2, think more. What do I mean by think more? I mean both in terms of thinking about your own work as well as actively reading, which we already discussed about in point 1. Analyzing what's out there, recognizing what's good, what's bad, what's maybe you would do differently about the reading that you've done, and trying to incorporate it into your own practice. But let's talk a little bit about what it means to think more about your work. So if you're engaging in some sort of prose or poetry, right? If you have elements of narrative, if you are doing more than analyzing, you're actually synthesizing. What you're doing is you're engaging in the symbolic nature of language. You are using the ultimate symbol, the story, the symbol of change or narrative, and you are using that to convey your message or your meaning. The problem is we don't always necessarily recognize our meaning right away. Instead, we may have an idea about what that meaning is. We may have an idea of where we want this prose or poetry or story to go, but it may be difficult for us at first, especially if the idea is deep, to actually convey that meaning, right? Because if we knew what we wanted to convey, we would just convey it. And that's oftentimes what writer's block is this idea of like, well, I don't know where to go with the story, with the piece, because I'm stuck. It just means that your brain hasn't necessarily solved the problem yet. Thinking works on two levels. You have your conscious brain as well as your subconscious brain. Your subconscious brain is much more powerful than your conscious brain. Your subconscious brain is working constantly. It's never turned off. That's why when you dream vividly. Your subconscious is taking control in the absence of your conscious mind. You want your subconscious to work with you on the work that you create, especially if it has meaning to you and you want it to express it to others. How do you do that? You do that by signaling with your conscious brain what your subconscious should be focused on. In other words, by thinking actively about your work, by thinking, okay, how do I get this across? Maybe that takes the form of an outline. Maybe that takes the form of a rough draft. Maybe that takes the form of you taking a walk with your dog and thinking about what you're working on while you're doing it. By signaling to your conscious mind, your subconscious mind will hopefully kick in at a certain point and process behind the scenes. And yes, sometimes it does take time. Sometimes you need the time to process because we're not all, super fast quantum computers. No, actually, I think we are. But that's neither here nor there. But point being, your brain needs time to process these large ideas with lots of possibilities, lots of quantum possibilities. So you need to give it time to think about it. You need to both actively think about it as well as passively or subconsciously think about it. But your subconscious will only start thinking about it if your consciousness is actively thinking about it and really working on that idea and toiling away. So that's reading more. Step 3, writing more. This may seem kind of obvious, but the only way that you can really improve on a craft, whether it's writing or basketball or, I don't know, graphic design, programming, which is just another form of writing really, is by practicing and getting repetitions. Not only practicing, but practicing the completion of projects. That, I think, is the most important thing when it comes to improving your writing and indeed all the other skills. You don't get good by practicing in and of itself. You get good by practicing and by finishing work. If you want to become a poet, you have to write poems. If you want to become a songwriter, you have to finish composing, writing songs. If you want to become a novelist, you have to finish novels. If you want to get good at writing essays, you have to write several essays. Why is this act of completion so important? I think it drives to the point of the subconscious as well, because if we subconsciously never finish what we're working on, you are subconsciously telling yourself that it's not important. I'll give you an example of this. I went to film school. I went to NYU, and never had I been in an environment with so much creativity, so many brilliant students going off the walls with their ideas. And yet, when it came down to it, by junior year, I would say less than 60-70% of the students enrolled finished their student films. And that was because we spent so much effort making these films, producing them, writing them, finding the resources, including money, to go make them. And we had in our minds that they were going to be perfect, right? That these were going to be the films that landed us the big director job somewhere down the line. And everybody was delusional in that way. And if you said you weren't, you're kind of lying to yourself, because everybody gets into film school thinking they're going to be the next Steven Spielberg. Anyway, when we all collectively got into the editing studio, we looked at the footage that we shot, and so many of us realized, wow, this is garbage, right? What we made is garbage, and it's not going to be any good. And we got discouraged, myself included. I count myself in this category. It took me 3-4 years after film school to finish my junior year film, because I was so ashamed of what it might turn out to be that I didn't even bother completing it until several years down the line. And that ultimately was a huge detriment to my creative journey, because it's only by finishing things that we really learn the value of them, right? And again, it might be a subconscious textual thing where you are saying to yourself, by not finishing, that you're a failure, right? Like you're telling yourself that, like you're not giving yourself the credit that you're due, and you're not giving yourself the room to be like, okay, I finished something, it was bad, but let me move on to the next one and it's going to be better. So if you're watching this and you are someone working on your craft, trust me, prioritize finishing your projects. You will be so much richer and you will advance so much more quickly if you do so, rather than focusing on making something perfect the first time around, and if it's not perfect, then abandoning it and working on something that you think will then be perfect. Perfect is the enemy of good. It can't be better unless it's finished first. So write more, yes, but write with scoping, with an ending in mind, because that ultimately is what's going to benefit you, is finishing projects. In conclusion, there is no secret formula to getting better at anything in life, but if you do want to get better at things, not so secret formula is thus: read more, think more, write more. Practice makes perfect. Think about where you want to be, work on it, and I promise you, tomorrow you'll be closer than you were yesterday. Live in the present. Bye, kids.